Welcome to the new season of the Tudors Dynasty podcast. I'm the founder and host of the show, and I am so pleased that you are back for another season with us. Today, we are launching the new season with an episode on Holbein's hidden gem with 3 amazing guests that I think you're really going to enjoy. So sit back and get ready to learn some history.
The Tudors Dynasty podcast.
Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer. So no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's all totally free with no catch. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Hi, everyone. My name is David Holland, and I'm the founder and organizer of an event that's being held in England next year called the Wolf Hall Weekend. And it's a tribute and a celebration of Dame Hilary Mantel, the late Dame Hilary Mantel, and her wonderful, incredible trilogy, the Wolf Hall trilogy, which includes the 3 books, Wolf Hall, Bring Up the Bodies, and The Mirror and the Light, of which I'm sure many of you listeners are familiar with. And I'm thrilled that we're running this series on Tudor Dynasty's podcast about the trilogy, but diving in with experts into various aspects of the life of Thomas Cromwell, particularly as seen through the eyes of Hilary Mantel in her trilogy. So that's the sort of the skew that we're placing on this series. So a bit more than just a history view, also a subjective view that taken by Hilary in the life of Thomas Cromwell. Today, I'm joined by 2 very auspicious experts who know a lot more about this than me. The first is Dr. Owen Emmerson. Hello, Owen. How are you?
Hello there. I'm very good, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, glad you could make it. And also Melanie Taylor. Hi, Melanie.
Hi, David.
Who
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no, thrilled. And I think regular listeners to the podcast will be familiar with you. You've been interviewed before on this podcast series. So just to say a little bit about my 2 auspicious guests, Dr. Owen Emmeson is a social and cultural historian. His PhD, by the way, was in the abolition of corporal punishment, which is quite relevant to Tudor times, of which there was a lot of corporal punishment, the death sentence in its various gruesome forms. Dr. Owen Emmeson has just finished 6 years as the castle historian, assistant curator at Hever Castle in Kent, that beautiful, beautiful building there in Kent, and also the author of 4 books, and the latest of which is called Holbein's Hidden Gem, Rediscovering Thomas Cromwell's Lost Book. Where can we get a copy of this book? I had a look on Amazon. I couldn't see it.
No, it's actually co-authored by my wonderful friend Kate McCaffrey and is available exclusively through Hever Castle. So you can actually get it on the online shop.
Oh,
I have one.
You've got one.
Oh.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so listeners, you have to go to Hever Castle's online shop to get a copy. Highly recommended. I'm going to do that straight after we hang up. Owen, that's great.
Thanks.
So Melanie Taylor, author and historian, has a particular interest in the art of the Tudor period, of which, of course, Hans Holbein the Younger was probably the best known today out of all of those artists. And of course, he is particularly well known for his portraits, I should say, of Henry VIII, and also of his various wives and queens, which are on display in various galleries around the world. And particularly today, we're talking about Holbein's portrait of Thomas Cromwell, the auspicious advisor to Henry VIII. And Melanie is also the author of 4 books, 2 historical novels and 2 contemporary novels. So I'm thrilled to have you with me today. So the subject we're going to discuss, is borrowing from your title, yours and Kate's title, Owen, Holbein's Hidden Gem. So I'm taking the liberty of just kicking off on this because I, again, want to just bring us back to the fact that we are looking at this through the eyes of Hilary Mantel's Thomas Cromwell. So I'm referring to the original book, Wolf Hall, and in my copy on page 525, in part 5, chapter 3, which she entitled A Painter's Eye, 1534, it's the shortest chapter in 2,000 pages of the trilogy. And I'm just going to quote from it because this sort of sets the scene. And it also shows how in just the last 14 months, our understanding of this portrait by Holbein has changed significantly, thanks to you and Kate. In this short passage, Cromwell enters his house, and he's got the grand reveal of from hands of the portrait. And so he looks at the picture's lower edge and allows his gaze to creep upwards. A quill, scissors, papers, his seal in a little bag, and a heavy volume bound in blackish green. The leather tooled in gold, the pages gilt-edged. Hans has asked to see his Bible and rejected it as too plain, too thumbed. He had scoured the house and found the finest volume he owned on the desk of Thomas Avery. It is the monk Pacioli's work, the book on how to keep your books, sent to him by his kind friends in Venice. So I'll stop there. So Hilary, sadly, really sadly, Owen you and I were chatting about this just a bit earlier. Hilary sadly passed away before you made the discovery. Did you want to just say a little bit about her sort of guess that it was Pacioli's book on accounting, double column accounting?
Yeah, absolutely. It was, really sad that Hilary never actually got to see the book that she so beautifully wrote about. And Hilary was a fairly frequent visitor to Hever Castle. She did quite a bit of promotional work there. And it would have been wonderful to be able to place that book in her hands. And we're all very sad that we never got to do that. But I actually really love how Hilary describes this, book in her wonderful novel. And I think it's a real testament to the kind of level of research that she did, because we know that Thomas Cromwell was importing great numbers of books actually from all over the place, and chiefly through an agent called Stephen Vaughan. So I really enjoy the fact that she is, theorized and thought about the potential for what this book could be. Really interesting that she initially wrote that his Bible had been, tossed aside in favor of this other work, when we know that this is it was indeed a scriptural prayer book. So I love it. I love the scene that she captures, and it was beautifully replicated in the television series as well. She did a jolly good job, in my opinion.
So there was some basis to her assumption, her potential assumption, that it was a book on accounting by Pacioli. Okay. You had read that then in Wolf Hall before, you and Kate. So tell me a little bit about how you and Kate, you just spent time staring at the portrait one day and thought, I wonder what that book is. I mean, how did it come about?
Well, the real sort of discoverer of the connection was a wonderful ex-colleague and friend of mine, Alison Palmer. So to give a bit of context about how we came to identify it, my wonderful friend Kate McCaffrey had been researching Anne Boleyn's 1527 Book of Hours, which was printed by Germaine Hardouin. And she very astutely discovered that Catherine of Aragon owned a similar copy. And with that information in mind, she felt sure that the other owners of this very limited print run from 1527, which was specifically for an English market, and the first time that this printer had done so, may also have been owned by some important individuals at the English court. And that was an astute observation by her. She located a copy at the Wren Library, which they have beautifully kept since 1660.
Yeah, just so listeners can know, you can actually, if you Google that, you can actually see a digital version of the book for, yeah. Okay, sorry,
Yeah,
I was into it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been beautifully digitized. It's been beautifully cared for. And they have known about the book's existence for quite some time and have cared for it in a beautiful way. What they didn't know was who was the first owner of that book. They had a provenance trail from 1660 because that was when it was donated. And we spent a lovely day in the Wren poring over this and other books. And we came away, with a real desire to sort of find out more about it. There aren't any inscriptions in the book other than later ones. And it was really by chance that the next day Alison went to a lecture where the beautiful Frick version of the portrait was put up on a slideshow, and of course it's such a unmistakable cover, really, and just was amazed. She just thought, my goodness, that's almost identical to the book we just saw. Of course we then had to just
Sorry, can I just ask what gave it away, Owen? Was it the jewel on the cover, or was it the embossing? What was, or the hallmarks? Or
I've not actually seen a book cover quite like this one. It's quite distinct. It has that central boss on it with the jewel. It also has the jewels in the clasps. But I think this is actually a real testament to Holbein's skill, in that it is almost identical to the book in the painting. I mean, it's quite amazing, the level of detail that he realised. So we did have to contemplate the possibility that the book cover had been put on in homage to that beautiful painting. So the work we did in the preceding year was to very much ask whether it was a duplicate book or whether it could possibly be the book in the painting.
Okay. So what clinched it in the end? What was the tipping point of the provenance?
So we had to prove that it existed before the painting had been painted. So we chiefly were focused on provenance, and we knew that it had been donated by an Anne Sadler in 1660, who was married to Ralph Sadler Jr. His father was Thomas Sadler, who was the godson of Thomas Cromwell, and his father was Ralph Sadler, who was Thomas Cromwell's protege. We then looked into the inventories of Standen that Ralph Sadler Sr. Had created upon his death, and we discovered a silver gilt psalm, which was marked out as distinct from the other psalters that were in his chapel. So we were thinking that could possibly be this book. It certainly is silver gilt. And then we went to Thomas Cromwell's 1529 will. Of course, Cromwell was executed, and therefore his possessions were attainted. But the executor of his will was Ralph Sadler, and all of his books were left to Ralph Sadler. And we know that certain items of Cromwell's did end up where they were intended from his will. We know that there was also a move to remove certain objects from his house when he was arrested, which wasn't an uncommon thing to do. But the real clincher, I think, was finding the hallmarks on the binding itself. Some very tiny little hallmarks, which not only proved that the binding was early modern, that it was French, it was made in Paris, but crucially that it was dated to between December 1529 and December 1530. So yes, the binding was definitely put on before the painting was created, and it was made by an incredibly important goldsmith, Pierre Mongeau, who was the goldsmith to King Francis I.
Which is where Anne Boleyn spent her youth.
Indeed, and Mongeau grew up in Blois, where Anne almost certainly was located on a semi-permanent basis when Claude, the queen to whom she served, was frequently pregnant at Blois. So, yes, we also know that Mongeau was creating items for the Boleyns, which was sort of another eureka moment. So, we ran all of our points by experts at the Louvre, who were experts in the work of Mongeau, bookbinding experts at Cambridge and at the V&A. And yes, they all came back with, I think it's the book. So, quite an extraordinary journey, really.
Oh, amazing, fantastic. Well, anybody that's going to be coming to the event next year, Wolf Hall Weekend in June next year, we'll get even more detail and we'll be diving in to that. But that's a great overview, Owen. Thanks. Melanie, I just want to bring you in, if I may. So prior to this discovery, were historians attaching any significance to that book in the portrait, to your knowledge at all?
Not as far as I'm aware. It was a case of it's a book. This is part and parcel of his, of Cromwell's life. The fact it has clasps on it, I've always thought that it was a religious text. I didn't actually buy into Hilary's idea that it was a book on, if you like, accounting. I thought, knowing Cromwell's interest in reformed religion, I looked at this and looked at the portrait and thought it's a religious text, and the fact it's just pushing over the edge, it's almost a case of reading into Cromwell's mind, and this is what you get from the Frick portrait. I don't know whether you agree with that, Owen. I mean, this is a man who is contemplating, he's looking out and thinking about it, and he's, as you so rightly said, David, he's got the skills of the articles of his work, his quills, his paper, his seal, and we know that originally he was obviously a devout Catholic, but from this portrait, it raises questions for me in my head as his time in Italy. Had he come to the conclusion that actually religion needed to be reformed, hence the conversations which he might have had with Holbein, and Hilary brings that so much to life, that relationship that they had. And for me, her portrayal of Holbein is very much the one that Cromwell sees and then starts to market the Tudors. And you've got Henry, you've got Jane, you've got a whole raft of courtiers. But the one missing element is that elusive portrait that may be stuck in a house in an attic somewhere of Anne, because they are so insightful. But you have to learn to read them. He is a genius. I mean, he is the master of capturing that inner person.
Yeah, and also, of course, for those who know Holbein, there is that famous painting of the ambassadors.
Oh, that's classic.
Where he's got that anamorphosis going on. For those of you who want to look it up, in the ambassadors painting, there's this elongated, looks like a sphere or so, but it's actually a skull. And if you walk far enough up to the right-hand side, there's videos of it on Google. You can Google it.
Yeah, I have to say, David, that I find it interesting that some people find it so difficult to see that. But
you've got to keep going. You've got to get right onto the edge. Yeah.
Oh, I just stand in front of it and go, that's a skull. But that's maybe because I've got such a weird, thing going with my eyes and my brain.
So there's no. I mean, I'm sure you've had a good look, Owen. There's no anamorphosis going on in the Cromwell painting that we can see. But so, next question for both of you, really, knowing what we now know then about the book and it being a book of ours, you sort of alluded to it, Melanie. But let's just see if we can draw any other further conclusions about, who. I wonder whose decision it was to put the book of hours in there. Hilary says, he looked for the Bible and it was too tatty in some way, so she went for this book. But is it actually making a statement then, do you believe, guys?
I do. Yeah.
Owen,
You do as well,
concur?
do you, Owen?
I do, yeah, very much so.
Because of Cromwell's, if you like, career and also his reforms, and also the relationship between artist and patron is very key.
Yes.
And that there would be a discussion as to what would be included. I mean, you've got the ring on his finger. I mean, that, Wolsey's ring is very, very prominent. And even though I didn't like the Tudors, they do that they made much of that in the TV series. And here it stands, front and center.
Yeah.
And, it's that close relationship between patron and commissioner. I think it was Cromwell's decision. Would you?
Yes. I do, and I love the way that you emphasize that it's the objects that are telling us about the person, and not necessarily the depiction of the person themselves. I think we've thankfully moved away from looking at this portrait of Cromwell and thinking he looks sly, he looks devious, he doesn't look trustworthy, and actually trying to understand what artist and patron were trying to project. And I think everything that is before him are his connections, his achievements, and they tell us about the man that he is and the work that he does. And I think it's closely linked to his promotion to Master of the Jewel House. That he's very, very much in the royal fold at this time. But I also think the inclusion of this traditionally Catholic text, it is intriguing. But then so is Cromwell's house. If we look at the inventories of Cromwell's house, we don't find a reformist. We find a traditional Catholic.
Yes.
And that's actually not surprising, because the precarity that comes with being a reformist at this time, really, I mean, you're not going to display these items for someone to note down in an inventory. But one thing that really interests me, quite often we see books open. We can actually read what they are reading. This book is very much closed. It is at the forefront. It is almost there for you to take. It's got that beautiful three-dimensional quality to it, but we can't see what's inside. And I think that's fascinating.
Well, there's a whole philosophical debate behind that, isn't there? I mean, you can go into the fact that it's closed from the general public, that you've got to be able to read Latin and you've got to know all of that. But he does have other pieces of paper on that table. And it's also, there's that scroll which is just visible on the left-hand side. And there is a copy of this, which was done in the 17th century. And it has a cartellino at the top, which,
indeed,
was that done from, has this been cleaned off, this one? I mean, there's a huge debate behind, have the Frick had it too much cleaned?
Is that the reference to him becoming the keeper of the jewel?
I think jewels? That's from memory it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, actually, very interestingly, the reference to him being Master of the Jewel House comes in the letter which is on his desk.
Has that been transcribed fully? Yeah.
Yes, you can read it very clearly. It's a letter from the king, purportedly. But very fascinatingly, the Frick version did have its scroll at the top removed in 1915.
1915, wasn't it?
Yes. And the other 16th century version, which survives at Burton Constable, retains its original scroll. And the version in the National Portrait Gallery has the scroll, which is the 17th century copy, but the scroll has been altered to the Earl of Essex. So there is something very intriguing going on here. And I have a feeling that the scroll in the Frick version was actually added after Holbein created the portrait. There's no evidence of it in the underdrawing at all. No. So something very fascinating going on there. We're trying to work this out at the moment for an article for the Burlington, but it's a slight enigma at the moment. It really is.
But that really sort of does highlight, first of all, who was coming into Cromwell's house? Who was going to see this? And then who was going to say, oh my gosh, heavens above, can I have a copy? Who paid? Oh, it must have been Holbein. And then you go back to that relationship of patron and, and you think, what did they say that I wanted on that scroll? Particularly the one where it's the reference to the Earl of Essex.
Indeed.
What on earth was going on there?
You could also say, I mean, my own personal thought, this is huge conjecture, but if it was a gift, if the Book of Hours was a gift from Anne Boleyn, which is one of the theories, Owen, then and according to Hilary, Anne Boleyn was extremely influential in him becoming the keeper of the jewels. It was sort of her suggestion in Henry's ear. Is this a little token? I'm acknowledging my power so far has been partly, been brought to me by Anne's support. Yeah, well, I'm really stretching fact and fiction here.
So there are a number of candidates for who may have gifted these books. It seems like they would have been gifted purely because they come from the same batch. However, if it was Anne, I don't think Cromwell was the original recipient, because it was created in 1527 and Cromwell just isn't in that circle in 1527. No. There is someone else who is very much in the circle of 1527, 1528, and that's Cardinal Wolsey. So it's not impossible to speculate that the original recipient of the book was Wolsey. And we know that the binding was put on between 1529 and 30, so a couple of years after it was printed. So perhaps the binding was put on to celebrate the promotion to Master of the Jewel House, or to celebrate his involvement in the great matter. It's a really intriguing sort of conundrum that we're trying to unravel at the moment, and is giving us endless fun in doing so.
Yeah, a question here, Owen. If it was originally in Wolsey's hands, could the binding and the symbolism of the stones, because originally they were thought to be jacinth.
That's right, yeah.
I mean, could he actually have given it to Cromwell? And the whole idea that, that it's, the jewel house is, and the jewel is within the book.
Indeed, yeah.
And it's the word of God.
He is a definite candidate, because in 1527 he knows that the king wants to marry Anne Boleyn. He still has to pay lip service to Catherine of Aragon, so he's got every reason to gift a very opulent copy to Anne Boleyn, the future queen, and a slightly inferior copy to the queen that's on the wane. And of course, in 1527, he has every reason to gift one to Cromwell, who has just been placed on his council. So he is a very good candidate, in my opinion, and it fits fairly well in terms of chronology, in a way that if it was a gift from the king or Anne, it probably wouldn't if Cromwell was the original recipient.
Yes.
Interesting. We haven't got a huge excuse me. We haven't got a huge amount of time, guys. This is fascinating. This is just a little teaser of what's to come at the event,
Indeed.
and making me even more excited about the event, of course.
I have to say, David, the one thing which really highlights here when you get people discussing this is the amount of research they've done of original documents and their importance and inventory specifically. We wouldn't know without that. That's where you and I cross over, because art history and history has the same discipline, really.
No, absolutely. I mean, we are beholden to those inventories, and I'm a bit of a geek. I love going through them.
Me too.
They really are.
I'm going to give Hilary the last word, if I may.
Oh, please.
Yes. So my reading of these 3 pages, which is of the chapter called A Painter's Eye, the reason I think it's called A Painter's Eye is because she's trying to portray an image of Cromwell that perhaps she is a balance of her overall view of Cromwell, that he's a normal guy. He's a normal human being just like us. When in fact, a lot of people would say that he sort of went, as a persona, Cromwell went a stage further. He was almost a force of nature, not to be, crossed. And in fact, after he's seen the portrait in Hilary's fictional, I do add, fictional account, it's so well written, we forget that this is all coming from her imagination. That the Chapuis, the ambassador, comes in and prances around and gives his view of Holbein's interpretation of Cromwell. He says, looking at that, one would be loath to cross you. To that extent, I think Hans has achieved his aim. In other words, so from Hilary's perspective, this is reminding us that this person, in the form of Thomas Cromwell, is potentially a force that's going to change people's lives in a significant way, but not only individuals' lives like Anne Boleyn and so on, and George Boleyn in this reference particularly, but he was going to change the course of English history significantly, of course. And then eventually Gregory, the son, comes in, Cromwell's son, and at the very end of the chapter, he sort of asks his opinion. So, what do you think, sort of, Gregory? And then Cromwell himself says, he turns to the painting and he says, "I fear Mark was right." And Gregory says, "Who is Mark?" And of course, it's Mark Smeaton, who was the pivotal person in the conspiracy against Anne Boleyn and her final execution, of course. And so Gregory says, "Who is Mark?" And Hilary's got Cromwell replying, "Oh, he's a silly little boy who runs after George Boleyn." Hint, hint. "I once heard him say that I looked like a murderer." And Gregory says, "Did you not know?"
Love it.
Sums Hilary up in her skill as an author and a writer there. I'm really grateful to you both for joining me today. This has been a very brief, but also, I think, a very energetic discussion. It just shows how it requires lots of different points of view to build a picture in any way. And I mean, we're looking forward to more discoveries. All power to you and Kate and the others involved in that. And also, we're looking forward to hearing more from you from other aspects of your new career in your book. So you've got another book in the pipeline, did you say?
Yes, I'm working on 4 at the moment. Not all at once. I quite like to have a number of projects on the go. I don't know why. It's just the way I work best, I think. But yes, some 20th century, but mostly 16th century. So yeah, hopefully you'll enjoy some of those when they come to fruition.
That's great. Thank you.
Excellent.
Melanie, you got anything on the boil at the moment?
Yeah, well, yes, I have. I've been asked to write contribute to a book of essays on the iconography of Mary I.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's I'm taking my research on Lavina Tearlink to the next level, and I've also just finished a paper which I'm hopefully submitting to the Society of Antiquaries on Hilliard miniature.
I'm halfway through a trilogy of psycho thrillers.
Oh, wow.
Dead bodies everywhere. So, yeah, completely different, just for fun more than anything else. It requires minimal historical research, let's put it that way. Just my own dark imagination, that's all that's required. Inspired no less by Hilary, of course, who
she is an inspiration.
Yeah, she is. And she was so generous with her help and advice, and you know, she made it. There was no ego with Hilary, as far as I'm concerned. She was a vulnerable writer, and we're all the beneficiaries for it. So thank you both again for your time today. I wish you the best with your new ventures. Looking forward to seeing you in person next June. wolfhallweekend.com if you're interested in joining us. We'd love to see you there. Thanks again to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Tudors Dynasty Podcast. You can follow and support the Tudors Dynasty Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Patreon @Tudors Dynasty.